Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association. Missouri produces wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details on the variety of products made in the state are at choosewood.com.
We hope you enjoy listening to this podcast of St. Louis on the Air, brought to you by University College at Washington University. With undergraduate and graduate programs, part-time, evening, and online. University College at Washington University, offering world-class education within reach.
And welcome back. This weekend it will be all things Scottish out near Spirit Airport in Chesterfield. The annual Scottish Games and Culture Festival is taking place Friday evening and Saturday. As organizers say, it will feature everything Scottish. When we think of the Europeans who came to St. Louis 150 years ago, we think of the Germans and the Irish. Well, the Scots came too, and there's a fairly sizable community still here. So let's learn more about it. Joining me in studio, Mark Sutherland is on the St. Louis Scottish Games Board. Thomas Richardson is Communications Director for the Scottish St. Andrew's Society of Greater St. Louis. Gentlemen, welcome. Great to have you here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
How many Scotsmen and women do we have, Thomas, in St. Louis?
Well, in the St. Louis region itself, it can be anywhere from a few dozen to a few hundred, but within the state of Missouri itself, I would average around about 500,000 folks who actually claim Scottish heritage in their lineage. So Scottish Americans are alive and well in the state of Missouri.
And Mark, they came here a long time ago with a lot of other people. Has it been sort of a hidden community?
Well, not really if you're going to be out in Chesterfield this weekend.
No.
We're going to be out there tossing things and making lots of noise with the bagpipes. Some people like that, some people don't. You kind of judge for yourself. But no, over the centuries, especially around the late 1700s, mid-1700s, a lot of Scottish immigrants came over to the United States, a lot of them actually via Ireland. So you had the Highland clearances, early 1700s. They went to Northern Ireland, and then the potato famines caused the families to keep coming. So you hear a lot about Scots-Irish. That's where that comes from. And they came to America and settled across the country and continue to have rather impactful families here across Missouri and across the U.S.
Thomas, maybe you can clarify something for me. I had always heard that many people from Scotland located and migrated to the Ozarks, and that there's still very much a presence of the Scottish world there. Is that right?
That's right, absolutely. Some of the greatest concentrations of Scots who moved westward via the Cumberland Gap in Kentucky, a lot of them had pushed further out west, definitely beyond the colonial borders back in the mid-18th century. And so, especially down in the Ozarks, there is a very strong Scottish and Scots-Irish community that has been kind of there over the years. And so, and not just within the Ozarks region, but also in the greater Midwest, there's been pockets of Scots and, of course, their subsequent Scottish-American descendants who have kind of settled and either moved on from those areas, but, of course, they stayed in other ventures such as working in business and agriculture, and so they became ingrained in that communities.
Yeah, Mark, I was about to ask what sort of contributions the Scots have made to our society.
Well, I mean, if you look even back to the beginning of the United States, so the Declaration of Independence was very much stolen from the Declaration of Arbroath, which was Scotland's declaration of freedom and independence hundreds and hundreds of years ago. So a lot of those principles were found in the founding documents of America. So what kind of influence? I think from the very beginning, the Scottish love of independence, of freedom, of equality, those are all seen in the founding of America, and they have built from that point onwards.
Wasn't Alexander Graham Bell a Scot?
Absolutely.
Well, he had a pretty good contribution.
Yeah, just a little bit. There's been, there's kind of, we make fun of the relationship between the Scottish and the English all the time, but a lot of the things like movable newsprint and the pneumatic tires, so Dunlop was Scottish, and the roads that are concave stove to where the water runs off. That was a Scottish invention as well. We basically invented the modern world. You've heard other people have claimed that, but no, it was the Scots.
Don't be so modest about it.
Yes, exactly.
And to build on his point, actually, there's many of the founding fathers themselves actually had tutors from Scotland in most of their early days in early education. Thomas Jefferson is one great example of having a string of tutors from Scotland who actually kind of shaped his political ideology.
The Scottish clans, I think, are fairly well known to the American public, aware of them in any case. Did the clan concept continue when they came to America?
Well, starting in the 1740s, and actually particularly after the Battle of Culloden in 1746, much of the old Scottish and Highland way of life, including things like the clan system, were broken up following a series of laws. But then as more of these Scottish immigrants moved towards North America and actually to larger parts of the world in Australia and New Zealand, a lot of these modern clan organizations that we see today started organizing in the late 19th and early 20th century as these more like social and educational groups. This is a way of educating a lot of these Scottish Americans about these clan organizations or clans that used to exist prior to the 1700s. And so it's a way of not only learning about a history, but it's also a good social connection. It's a good social network.
And simultaneous to that happening in the U.S. was Queen Victoria back in the United Kingdom. She had a very romantic view of the Scottish clan system, and she was pretty much the driving force behind the Tartans, and the Tartans being assigned to various families. Mm-hmm. And so the impact of that growing in the United Kingdom and the U.S.'s infatuation, basically, with all things British, caused those elements to then rapidly appear in the United States.
What exactly are the Tartans?
So each family has it's a plaid, basically. Mm-hmm. But my family, the Sutherland family, and the families that are under the Sutherland clan, we have a particular color combination that we wear, and nobody else but our family is allowed to wear that. You'll see very commonly the Royal Stuart tartan, which is the very commonly seen red and very strong red color to it. That can be worn by anybody. But when you get, especially if you come out to the games this weekend, you will see a variety of tartans. And for those that, and I can't claim to be this good, for those that know their tartans, they will know the last name of the person they're walking up to.
Wow. I understand there was an attempt, and I'm not sure if it was successful or not, to come up, Thomas, with a Missouri tartan?
Yes, there was. There was a bill put forth last year to establish a Missouri state tartan. Actually, I'll let Mark go ahead and talk more about that.
Yeah, so really good support from Representative Grier out in Chesterfield and various other members of the Missouri House and Senate. It got all the way to its final vote in the Senate on the final day, the final hour of session, and didn't quite make it through. So we plan on of having that bill reintroduced next year. The tartan has been designed. It was designed by a Missouri designer. The colors and the patterns represent the various symbols of Missouri, from the bluebird to the great bear and the seal. So there's a lot of connections with the design to the symbols that already exist in Missouri, and we hopefully will get that to be official and recognized by Missouri this coming year.
How many different tartans would there be? I mean, almost infinite.
Well, the number of tartans can be created at any time by anybody, as long as sometimes they will have a specific purpose or symbolism built into them. And so I know, Missouri working towards its state tartan, but also I believe it's many other United States have their own tartans as well they recognize. And then within that, each of the armed services in the U.S. military have a tartan. There's actually a newer one that was called the World Peace Tartan that's actually designed to actually create this message of carrying world peace throughout. And so tartans themselves can be created for a specific purpose. Sometimes they have a strong symbolism and family affiliation behind it. And the tartans themselves can be assembled that way. One
of the things it was suggested that I would talk about is ancestry was certainly important to all groups, but genealogy as well, that this is something that is of particular interest to you and yours. I'll start with you, Mark. How so and why?
Well, I mean, I think everybody wants to know where they come from. It's part of our roots as a person, part of our identity. One of the things that people will be able to do at the Scottish Games is meet with the various clans have their tents. And you'll be able to go in and talk about genealogy, talk about family history. They'll be able to look up your surname, find out which part of Scotland your ancestors came from, which tartan, which part, all the various symbols that go along with it. But I'm fascinated by it personally. I think a lot of people are. We've traced our ancestry back to the mid-1700s on my mother's side in Edinburgh in Scotland, on my father's side in the very north coast of Scotland, which was called the Sutherland, because the Vikings called it that because it was their southern vacation properties. But I think it's important to everybody. And one of the fun things you get to do when you're tracing back your Scottish ancestry is there is so much more pomp and circumstance and pageantry involved with the clan system, and we're excited to be able to expose people to that.
Thomas, I would think that would be difficult, though, to learn, given the fact that you're here and the records aren't.
Well, a lot of that really depends on, like you said, the records themselves. As long as they're there and intact, it creates a better trail that people can follow to understand where they come from and, where families are, originated. So, and actually, this was part of a research that I did as part of my master's thesis was tracing Scots heritage in the Midwest. And so the genealogical aspect itself is probably the key point in how people trace their ancestry. A lot of people, big misconception that I'd come across was they think, well, my last name is McDonald, that must mean I'm Scottish. Like, well, you have to do the historical research behind it because sometimes the names can change generations, whether or not you had that background. So for the person who really wants to dig deep into their family history, they take that genealogical path, which is why when you come out to the games where you meet a lot of these folks who share that knowledge, a lot of them are these big history buffs, and they handle their family history as well.
And there are three types of people in the world. There are those of Scottish descent, there are those who are born in Scotland, and there are those that want to be Scottish. So
Absolutely.
We accommodate all three.
Well, you're talking to an Irishman, so let's
we get
let's
along
be careful.
Well. We get along really well.
I guess so. If it was part of your route to this country, it must have been getting along well. Okay, let's talk about the games. I'll turn to you, Mark, for this. An awful lot going on, and people might be surprised if they haven't seen or been to any of these festivals before exactly what the sports are that you're going to be conducting.
Yeah, so in Scottish heavy athletics, we toss things. So the most famous thing is the caber, the tree. So you will see that throughout the day on Saturday. So it's a huge, heavy tree, and they balance it and toss it, and hopefully they don't die. Nobody's died yet, but you do have to go through a lot of training to be able to do it. In addition to throwing the tree, there's the hammer toss, which is actually where the modern the hammer toss you see in the Olympics that came from. There's stones for distance and weights for height. You'll see the shot put. Basically, it's where the shot put came from. And then there's sheaf tossing, which is a more of an American addition to
sheep tossing.
Sheep, no, sheep. That would be we should institute the sheep tossing event. No, sheaf, as in like a bale of hay, basically. So they'll be tossing that. So a lot of throwing things. Very large individuals, very muscular men and women. At that point, anybody who's inclined to call a kill to skirt usually thinks twice because of the size of these athletes. And then in addition to the athletics, we've got all sorts of music. Celtic rock. We have a Celtic rock tent, the Lefroy Celtic rock tent. We have the Alex Sutherland Memorial folk music tent. So that's all the folk music, more of the easy listening style music. And then bagpipes. Lots and lots of bagpipes, probably more than 100 bagpipers throughout the day. And at the end of the day at 4:30 on Saturday, you'll see all of them on the field at the same time.
I'm not going to ask the obvious question about the kilts, but let's talk a little bit more about what else is going on at the games, and that is, what about food?
Well, there will be a traditional bill of fare along with food trucks and other local institutions. And so, Mark, what else will there be?
So the Scottish Arms, so if everybody's probably familiar with them, they're in the central West End. They will be there, and they'll serve the traditional haggis and bridies and Scotch eggs, which are absolutely amazing. So hard-boiled egg, surrounded in sausage, battered and deep-fried. It's just gorgeous.
No wonder they throw trees around if they're reading like that.
Absolutely amazing. And there'll be normal stuff as well in case you're not wanting to try new things. People talk about haggis in a kind of Mike Myers has a lot to answer for when it comes to haggis.
Yes,
but
he
haggis
does.
is basically lamb sausage. Is all it is. So I have a variety of that. Schlafly does a special Scottish ale for the games, so that'll be available throughout the day. Lefroy whiskey, Scotch whiskey, will be doing tastings throughout the day, and there'll be a variety of American and Scottish delicacies for people to enjoy.
In the time that we have left, I want to go back to the games themselves. Where did all this throwing these heavy things around come from?
It comes from a couple of things. So a lot of it was training for war. So back then, the English would not allow the Scots to train with weapons. For some reason, we kept rising up and causing them problems. So we trained with stones and various other things. The caber tossing didn't actually come from the war training. The caber tossing came from... There's lots of theories, but the one that makes the most sense is from the logging industry in Scotland, where they use this maneuver to toss felled trees into the middle of the river to carry it downriver. And so that's where that came from. So they just kind of became feats of strength as part of that part of culture, and that turned into a more organized competitive sport.
And this has been going on for a long time.
Hundreds and hundreds of years.
Oh, boy.
Yes.
Yeah. Are you going to be participating, Thomas, in any of these tossing events?
Well, not in the actual athletics themselves. I'll leave those to the ones who've
The
been doing them
athletes.
professionally. But I'll be there in the capacity with the Scottish St. Andrews Society. And we'll be working out there for both Friday and Saturday. And so we've been a long-time sponsor of the games, and we'll continue to be for many years.
Something to look forward to. Thanks to Mark Sutherland for being with us, the St. Louis Scottish Games Board, Thomas Richardson, Communications Director for the Scottish St. Andrews Society of Greater St. Louis. Again, the Scottish Games and Culture Festival, Friday and Saturday, adjacent to St. Louis Spirit of St. Louis Airport in Chesterfield. I'm Don Morris. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio, 90.7 KWMU.
Support comes from Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to sustainable and sound conservation of the state's forests, which support more than 41,000 Missouri jobs, resulting in a $10 billion industry. ChooseWood.com.